Maybelle was a rescued bobcat brought to a sanctuary for a peaceful life. But from her very first night, she cried nonstop. The caretakers tried everything to soothe her. Fresh meat, hiding places, soft bedding, calm voices, even leaving a dim light on so she wouldn't feel alone. But nothing helped. A full veterinary exam showed she was perfectly healthy. No injuries, no infection. Yet her cries only grew more desperate, focused, almost purposeful. She paced along the fence line again and again, ignoring other rescued bobcats and animals, staring toward the distant tree line as if calling for someone specific. Caretaker Elias Thorne was the only one who seemed able to figure out why. But desperate for answers, Elias went back to the property she'd been rescued from, where he learned the shocking truth that will leave you breathless. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The early morning sun over the Blue Ridge Mountains usually brought a sense of serenity to the Golden Oak Wildlife Sanctuary. It was a time when the mist clung to the valleys and the air smelled of damp pine needles and earth. For Elias Thorne, the sanctuary's head caretaker, this was the golden hour, the time before the phones started ringing and the daily grind of maintenance began. It was a time to simply be with the animals. Elias was a man of quiet routines, his face weathered by decades of working outdoors, his hands rough but incredibly gentle. He had spent the last 20 years dedicated to the rehabilitation of North America's native predators. He understood the language of silence, the flick of an ear, the twitch of a tail. He knew that wild animals did not seek human affection. They sought respect and safety. But for the past 3 days, the peace of Golden Oak had been shattered. In Quarantine Pen 4, a newly arrived female bobcat named Maybelle was falling apart. She had been brought in by animal control after being found trapped in a barn on the outskirts of a rural development, looking thin and terrified. Physically, she was a magnificent specimen of Lynx rufus. Tawny fur dappled with distinct black spots, tufted ears that stood like sentinels, and those intense, soulful eyes that seemed to hold ancient secrets. Yet, Maybelle was not adjusting. She was grieving. From the moment the transport crate had opened, she had not stopped crying. It wasn't the aggressive growl of a cornered predator, nor the hissing of a feral cat. It was a sound that chilled Elias to the bone. A low, rhythmic, rasping yowl that rose and fell like a dirge. It was a vocalization he had rarely heard in all his years. The distress call.
What's going on with you?
Elias walked toward the quarantine sector, his boots crunching softly on the gravel path. He carried a bucket of high-quality raw meat, rabbit and quail, hoping to entice her. "Morning, Maybelle," he murmured, keeping his voice low and steady. "Let's try this again, girl." As he approached the heavy gauge mesh of Pen 4, the crying stopped for a split second, only to resume with even greater intensity. Maybelle was pacing. She didn't walk. She marched, back and forth along the southern fence line, her paws hitting the same spots in the dirt until she had worn a groove into the earth. She didn't look at Elias. She didn't look at the food. Her gaze was fixed desperately on the distant tree line, beyond the sanctuary fences, toward the south. "Come on, Mama," Elias whispered, his heart aching. "You're safe here. Nobody's gonna hurt you." He slid the food through the feeding chute, but Maybelle didn't even flinch. She continued her patrol, pausing only to let out that heart-wrenching cry. It was a sound of absolute desolation, a signal sent into the void, waiting for an answer that never came. Later that morning, Dr. Sarah Miller, the sanctuary's veterinarian, met Elias by the enclosure. She was a younger woman, brilliant and pragmatic, but even she looked worn down by the constant noise. "I've run the blood panel twice, Elias," she said, looking at the clipboard with a frown. "Everything is normal. No infections, no internal injuries, no dental issues. Her hydration is slipping because she's refusing to drink enough, but physically, she is a healthy, prime-age female." "It's not physical, Sarah," Elias said, watching the Bobcat pace. "Look at her eyes. She's looking for something. I've seen stressed animals before. I've seen fear. This isn't fear, this is loss." "Maybe she had a mate?" Sarah suggested, though she knew bobcats were solitary animals, coming together only briefly to breed. "No." Elias shook his head slowly. "That's not a mate call. That's a location call. She's trying to guide someone to her. Or she's trying to get back to someone." The realization hit him with the weight of a stone. He watched her posture, the way her belly hung slightly loose, the specific distension of her teats. They weren't currently lactating heavily, which had thrown them off initially, but the signs of recent motherhood were there if you looked past the trauma. "She's a mother," Elias said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "She has kittens out there. We missed it because she's dried up from the stress and starvation, but she's got babies." "If she has kittens in the wild," Sarah said gently, "and she's been here for 3 days. Elias, they wouldn't survive. Not at that age, without warmth or food." "I know," Elias said, closing his eyes. "But she doesn't know that. She's calling them." The thought of the bobcat pacing the fence, crying out to ghosts in the forest, was unbearable. But something nagged at Elias. The report from the capture site said she was found in a barn, trapped in a live cage set for raccoons. The property owner had called it in, claiming she was a nuisance. "I'm going out there," Elias decided, turning abruptly. "To the capture site?" Sarah asked. "Elias, it's a 2-hour drive. What are you going to find?" "Answers," he replied. "If there were kittens, maybe they're still in the barn. Maybe they're hiding. Or maybe the guy who trapped her knows something he didn't tell animal control." The drive south was tense. Elias drummed his fingers on the steering wheel of the sanctuary's beat-up pickup truck. The landscape shifted from the protected forests of the sanctuary to the sprawling, fragmented farmland that characterized the edge of the county. This was the friction zone, the place where human expansion collided violently with wildlife habitat. He pulled up to the address listed on the intake form. It was a sprawling property with a half-finished house and several dilapidated outbuildings. The yard was cluttered with old machinery, rusted cars, and piles of lumber. It was the kind of place where things went missing and questions were discouraged. Elias stepped out of the truck, adjusting his cap. A man in grease-stained coveralls emerged from a shed, wiping his hands on a rag. This was Mr. Henderson, the property owner. He looked at Elias with suspicion, his eyes narrowing. "Can I help you?" Henderson asked, not offering a hand. "Mr. Henderson, my name is Elias Thorne. I'm from the Golden Oak Sanctuary. We took in the bobcat you trapped earlier this week," Elias said, keeping his tone polite and professional. "Yeah? You come to bring it back?" Henderson scoffed. "Thing was a menace, killing my chickens." "No, sir, she's staying with us. But we're having some trouble with her," Elias lied smoothly. "We need to know if she was alone. Usually, bobcats travel solo, but sometimes there are complications. Did you see any others? Maybe some kittens?" Henderson hesitated. His eyes flickered toward the barn, then back to Elias. It was a subtle tell, a micro-expression of guilt that Elias, with his years of reading behavior, caught instantly. "Nope," Henderson said, a little too quickly. "Just the one. Big snarling thing. Glad she's gone." Elias nodded, pretending to accept the answer. "I see. Well, that's unfortunate. She's acting like she's separated from her young. If there are kittens around, they'll die rotting under your barn without her. Smell would be terrible in a few days." He let the comment hang in the air, watching the man's reaction. Henderson shifted his weight. "Look, I ain't seen no kittens," Henderson grunted. "Now, if you're done, I got work." Elias turned to leave, his heart sinking. He had hoped for a confession, a clue. He reached for the door handle of his truck. And then, he heard it. It was faint, barely a whisper over the wind and the distant hum of traffic. A high-pitched, chittering sound. Cheep, cheep, row. Elias froze. He knew that sound. It wasn't a bird. It wasn't a domestic cat. It was the distress call of a juvenile bobcat. He spun around, staring at the barn. "What is that?" "What's what?" Henderson demanded, stepping in front of Elias. "I don't hear nothing but the wind. You need to get off my property." "That's a bobcat kitten," Elias said, his voice hardening. "Mr. Henderson, do you have a wild animal in that barn?" "It's none of your business," Henderson shouted. "Get off my land before I call the sheriff." "Call him," Elias challenged, stepping closer. "Possession of native wildlife without a permit is a felony in this state. If I call the game warden, they're going to tear this place apart. Or you can show me what's in the barn, and maybe we can work this out." The threat of the law deflated Henderson. He cursed under his breath, spitting on the ground. "It ain't a kitten, it's nearly grown. I figured I could sell it. Fellow down in Florida pays good money for exotic pets." Elias felt a surge of nausea. The illegal pet trade was the dark underbelly of his world, a place of misery and death. "Show me." Reluctantly, Henderson led him into the gloom of the barn. In the back corner, stacked atop some old pallets, was a crude wire cage, far too small for any creature. Inside, huddled in a ball of misery, was a young male bobcat. He wasn't a tiny kitten, but a juvenile, perhaps 6 or 7 months old. He was at that awkward stage, lanky, with paws too big for his body, but still entirely dependent on his mother for hunting lessons and protection. He was terrified, his ears flattened against his skull, his eyes wide orbs of panic. He was with her, Elias realized aloud. You trapped the mother, and then you grabbed him. He was easy to catch once the mama was gone, Henderson admitted. He wouldn't leave the trap she was in. The cruelty of it struck Elias like a physical blow. The boy had stayed by his trapped mother, loyal and frightened, only to be snatched up for profit. "I'm taking him," Elias said. It wasn't a question. "Now hold on," Henderson protested. "I got a buyer lined up, $500. Elias didn't have $500 in the sanctuary petty cash. He barely had $20 in his wallet. But he looked at the young cat, trembling in the filth, and thought of Maybelle back at the sanctuary, screaming into the void. "I'll give you $300, Elias said, reaching for his own checkbook from his back pocket. This was his personal rent money. "Right now, and I don't call the warden. You take the money and you forget you ever saw these cats. If I ever hear about you trapping again, I will bring the entire Department of Natural Resources down on your head." Henderson looked at the checkbook, then at the cat. Greed warred with fear. $350. "Done," Elias snapped. He wrote the check with a shaking hand, ripped it out, and shoved it at the man. "Open the cage." The drive back to Golden Oak felt different. The tension was still there, but it was replaced by a frantic hope. The young male, Elias decided to name him Miles for the distance he'd come, was in a proper transport carrier in the passenger seat. He was quiet now, exhausted, curled into a tight ball. When Elias pulled into the sanctuary driveway, the sun was beginning to dip, casting long, golden shadows across the grass. He radioed ahead to Sarah. "Get the intake room ready. I'm bringing in a juvenile. And Sarah, tell the staff to clear the area around Pen 4. "You found one?" Sarah's voice crackled with disbelief over the radio. "I found him," Elias said. The process had to be careful. They couldn't just throw them together. Disease protocols, aggression, rejection, there were risks. But Elias knew in his gut that protocols had to bend today. The level of distress Maybelle was in was life-threatening. They brought the carrier to the safety airlock of Pen 4. Maybelle was at the far end of the enclosure, her back to them, still pacing, still crying that low, mournful sound. Elias set the carrier down inside the airlock and signaled for Sarah to open the secondary gate. He slowly unlatched the carrier door. Miles hesitated. He sniffed the air. The scent of the sanctuary, pine, earth, and something familiar. Maybelle stopped pacing. She froze mid-step. Her ears swiveled backward. She had heard the carrier click. She turned, her golden eyes locking onto the small form emerging from the box. Miles let out a soft, tentative chirp. The transformation was instantaneous. The grieving, rasping creature vanished. Maybelle let out a sound that Elias had never heard before. A sharp, joyful bark that transitioned into a high-pitched trill. She rushed the fence, hitting the mesh with a thud, not in aggression, but in desperate desire to be close. "Let him in," Elias whispered. Sarah pulled the release cable for the inner door. Miles didn't walk, he scrambled. He bolted across the enclosure. Maybelle met him halfway. What happened next brought tears to the eyes of everyone watching. There was no hesitation, no sniffing for recognition. Maybelle collapsed onto her side, exposing her belly, and Miles threw himself into her fur. She wrapped her front paws around him, pulling him tight against her chest, burying her face in his neck. She licked him frantically, his ears, his face, his paws, grooming away the scent of the barn, the fear, and the humans. Miles was kneading her belly, chirping incessantly, burying his face in her fur. The reunion was electric, a release of tension so palpable it felt like the air pressure in the sanctuary had changed. Elias stood by the fence, his hand resting on the cold metal, watching them. The constant, rasping crying had stopped. The silence that fell over the sanctuary wasn't empty anymore. It was full. It was peaceful. "She wasn't sick," Sarah whispered, wiping her eyes. "She was heartbroken." "They remember," Elias said softly. "People think animals are just instinct, but they remember family." For the next few weeks, the change in Maybelle was miraculous. She began to eat ravenously. Her coat regained its luster, turning from a dull, dusty brown to a rich, gold-flecked pelt. She and Miles were inseparable. They slept in a pile of fur, limbs tangled together. Miles, safe under his mother's watch, began to play, batting at leaves and stalking beetles with the clumsiness of a teenager. But the surprises weren't over. About a month after the reunion, Elias noticed Maybelle was gaining weight rapidly. Her appetite was insatiable. She was becoming fiercely protective of the den box they had built, lining it with straw and fur. "Sarah," Elias said one afternoon, watching Maybelle chase Miles away from the den entrance with a warning growl. "I think we need to do another ultrasound. I think we missed something." They managed to lure Maybelle into the squeeze cage for a quick, stress-free scan. Dr. Sarah applied the gel to Maybelle's rounded belly. The screen flickered to life. There, in the grainy black and white, were heartbeats. Not one, not two. "My God," Sarah breathed. 1, 2, 3, 4. "Elias, there are 5 of them." Elias stared at the screen, stunned. Maybelle had been pregnant when she was trapped. Her desperate cries hadn't just been for the son she had lost. They were for the future she was carrying. She had been fighting for her entire dynasty. The stress of captivity and the loss of Miles could have caused her to miscarry, but she had held on. She had waited. "She's a fighter," Elias said, a smile breaking across his face. Spring arrived at the Golden Oak Sanctuary in a riot of wildflowers and green shoots. The air turned warm and sweet. In the large forested enclosure that was now their permanent home, the cycle of life continued. On a Tuesday morning, under the shelter of a hollow log, Maybelle gave birth to 5 healthy, squirming bobcat kittens. They were tiny, blind balls of spotted fur, mewling softly for their mother. Elias watched from a distance with binoculars, respecting their privacy. He saw Maybelle nursing them, her eyes half closed in contentment. And nearby, sitting on top of the log like a sentry, was Miles. The young male, who had been destined for a cage in a Florida living room, had taken on the role of Big Brother. He didn't intrude, but he stayed close. When Maybelle needed to stretch or drink, Miles would hop down and sit by the kittens, his large ears swiveling to catch the sound of a falling leaf or a distant bird. He was learning to be a protector, guided by the mother who had refused to give up on him. Elias lowered his binoculars and leaned back against the old oak tree. The sun was warm on his face. He thought about the check he had written, the money he would never see again. He thought about the fear in the barn and the silence of the first few nights. Then he looked at the family in the enclosure. Mabel groomed one of the new babies while Miles chased a butterfly near the fence, his movements full of wild, chaotic joy. The sanctuary was quiet, but it was a good quiet. It was the silence of safety. Elias knew that eventually the kittens would grow. Some might be released back into the wild to reclaim the heritage that had almost been stolen from them. Others might stay, ambassadors for their species. But for now, they were together. He tipped his cap to the mother cat. "You did good, Maybelle," he whispered. "You did good." In a world that often felt cruel and indifferent, where nature was pushed to the margins, a mother's love had bridged the gap. It had pulled a family back from the brink and created a new beginning. And as Elias walked back toward the caretaker's cabin, his heart full, he knew that this moment of peace and continuity was worth more than all the gold in the world.